let's go ahead and get started here. Just before I give like the official intro, like just to be clear, we're talking about the church's response to the coronavirus. Yes, that's the subject we decided on.
Yeah, and
okay.
Not getting into politics.
Not getting into politics. We'll make that clear in the first couple minutes. All right. So,
Father Adam, did you hear that?
I never get into politics. It's against my religion.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Oh, all right. Welcome everyone back to the second Zoom episode of Three Priests Walk in a Bar. It's good to have everybody here. It's always fun to see everybody's faces, even when we can't get together. This is where y'all can say hi if y'all can hear me.
Hello.
I'm used to behaving on Zoom meetings, muting myself and not interrupting.
No, it's better if everybody's interrupting everybody.
We're so much more fun when we interrupt each other.
Exactly. See, it's like that. I couldn't understand anybody. All right. So today, before we get around to talking about what everybody's imbibing for this episode, we just want to say at the outset, our topic is going to be very apropos for the times, the church's response to the coronavirus. And we'll probably get into what it is, what it has been, and maybe what it should be going forward as a lot of states are seeking to reopen, what the church's response could be in response to that. So before we get around, let's go around and say what everybody's drinking. You guys are, I'm realizing you guys are day drinkers. Like we're like 3 PM here. I don't have anything.
Nick, you get the award for being the least prepared consistently.
Where's your Dr. Pepper? You don't even have your Dr. Pepper.
No, I don't. We're out.
Man.
I'll just have to drink water, darn.
These are desperate pandemics conditions. I don't know if we're going to survive this, guys.
They really are. I had my first Bud Light a few days ago. That's how low I've sunk.
Oh, and you have made fun of our dear Father Lou for drinking Pabst.
I still make fun of him for drinking Pabst.
I quite like that.
Not that bad. It's not one I would choose. It's not that bad.
That should be an advertising slogan, Pabst. It's not that bad.
You could do worse.
You could do worse. So, Father Adam, I saw you had a big bottle down there. What are you having today?
Oh well, I'm trying to keep it consistent, and I have chosen to in solidarity with all of us who are suffering through this pandemic, to drink the Corona Familiar.
Still.
There you go. So Corona it is again.
Where do you get that? Because I usually don't see the big bottles in stores.
Usually in gas stations where people of ill repute hang out.
It's right over there with the sushi, right?
Gas station sushi is good.
Oh, no.
No, thank you.
All right. Pastor Lou, what do you got?
I have, I don't know if you can see the color okay, but it's a sour.
Ooh.
It's dry hopped Lazarus sour. I like the sour. It's a sour time, but I'm hoping in the resurrection like Lazarus. And anyway, it's freshly canned. Do you see this? For those at home that might be hearing the podcast, the local brewery is really making some relatively fresh cannings for home delivery. And that's how I've been getting it since I'm kind of with some of my health issues stuck at home. So I appreciate Spencer Devon Brewers in Fredericksburg for providing some tasty refreshment.
Nice.
As I'm quarantined. Good stuff.
I have a former parishioner's husband who has a mobile canner, and he goes to breweries and cans and helps them provide, probably for the same reasons, for home delivery.
Oh, nice.
And I've gotten some of his factory seconds.
I think with the staffing issues and everything that it helps them probably.
Yeah.
But they do have labels, but the last batch I got, none of them had labels on them, just temporary labels, handwritten. Like this was canned on April 17th.
Nice.
Oh, that's not too bad, too far back. All right, Father Nick, what's the dark brew I see over there?
Yeah, I mean, as you might expect, I've got a stout. This is a stout from a local, another local Richmond brewery. In this case, Hardywood.
Nice. Which stout?
He's drinking dude beer this time.
I poured it in downstairs before I came up here, so I actually don't remember. But I know it's a stout. So.
Is it one of the barrel aged?
And on this probably, and on this nice hot day, it's kind of like drinking cold molasses.
Yeah.
I will go for stouts anytime. I love a good sour. I really do, but I will go for stouts anytime.
I'm slowly making my peace with sours.
I saw that.
They're growing on me. I haven't.
It's good. I like it.
I don't have the final verdict, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Just so I can say some kind of a drink, I will say I have been drinking the ardent barrel aged stout that Father Nick had a few episodes ago.
That's good.
It's delicious. I love it. It reminds me of the Hardywood Christmas morning that they have around Christmas time.
Yeah.
It's really so good. I just got to be careful because I'm a lightweight. I have to really drink a lot of water before I have one bottle of that stuff. Make sure it's after dinner, which is why I can't have any during this podcast recording.
I also recommend, before we move on, just a local brew from Spencer Devon again. They have one that's called Wash Your Damn Hands.
Nice.
That's based on that verse in James, right? That's based on the verse in the Epistle of James.
Maybe that's what
hands, sinners. Yeah.
We should claim that, but it's a farmhouse ale and it's pretty good as well. But I already had that, so I tried something new today.
So I saw someone talk about their favorite verse that was in Ephesians, and it was in the contemporary English version. The way they word it is really good. I can't remember where it is. It's in Ephesians 5. I can't remember which verse, but that translation just says, "Don't be stupid."
Good advice.
Well, I've already transgressed.
All right. Well, let's get on to our topic for today. The church's response to coronavirus. And like I can't remember if we said this right at the beginning or before we actually started going with the recording, but we're going to try to keep this as apolitical as possible, because the church, while part of its nature is political in placing Christ as king above all in that sense. The church is neither Republican nor Democrat, left nor right. It transcends and all of that with the kingdom of God. So we're trying to figure out what a response is based on those qualities, not how's this going to make me look to Democratic supporters, Republican supporters, or anything like that. We want what is best for the body of Christ. I think we can all agree with that. That may come in a couple of different flavors, and I'd like to see what you guys think about that. So how would we like to start?
I wonder, maybe before we kind of reflect on it, if we should just go around and say what our churches are actually doing. Like what is because each of us are part of churches where hierarchical churches where we have a bishop who either gives us directives or at least gives us guidance on what we should be doing. And so maybe just saying flatly what guidance we've been given and what we've been doing. And for that matter, in my case, we're not allowed to have, following the governor's rules, no gatherings more than 10 people, which my bishop has interpreted to mean we just shouldn't be gathering for in-person worship, even if it's less than 10 people. And up through Easter, we were allowed to live stream or record in our churches with just a few people. But at the end of Holy Week and with Holy Pascha, as Father Adam would say, or Easter, the bishop asked us to no longer live stream or record in our churches, but to only do so from our homes as a way of showing that we are taking the governor's injunction to stay at home seriously. And so that's what we're doing in the Diocese of Virginia.
And just so everybody listening, most of our listeners will know this, but anybody that doesn't know, just a refresher, we are in Virginia, so we're following those particular orders.
I guess I'll go next. The bishop for the synod, Virginia Synod, that I'm part of the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, he also is advising us to follow the state guidelines. Unlike the Episcopal Church, our polity is a little different. We are not mandated to follow him per se with any decree he makes. Our constitutions allow for a great deal of congregational power and decision making. So in his case, he's offering us guidance to stay at this point, based on the latest direction from the governor and the health departments. We are not supposed to meet for worship until the Sunday following the tentative date for Virginia reopening, which is June 10th. So our building would start opening up June 10th if all was to go well, and then the 14th would have worship. Again, he is preferring that we don't gather in person, similar to the Episcopal Church, but he also understands that not everyone's situation is the same. For example, in our congregation, with multiple leadership, including myself, having different risk factors for COVID, we have decided, with consultation with the church council and worship team that we have, to not provide for worship out of the sanctuary, not live anyway, not gathering groups of people together at any size. We are pretty much creating and then pasting different parts together from wherever people are. It might include someone in the sanctuary, but not gathered together. Other churches are doing different things, which might come out in the conversation. I know of a couple of ELCA churches that are using local broadcasting equipment to have worship in cars. They gather in the parking lot. There is direction from the state on how to do that, even including how to keep your bathrooms open and everything. But there's different safety issues involved in doing that. In our particular instance, in Fredericksburg, we wouldn't have the space really. We're surrounded by a neighborhood, a very traditional neighborhood with sidewalks, and everyone's on top of each other. So our parking lot's very small. We have street parking for the most part. And then you have other folks that are doing similar to what Father Adam's going to talk about, which is to gather a few people, very few people, limited amount, and they'll have worship there. But there is a debate on, and I think this is true for the Episcopal Church, even though I think the theology is pretty clear, about whether folks can somehow commune at home at the same time as someone's sharing the divine liturgy in a worship space, their worship setting. I think that's going to, Father Adam, for those that aren't watching on Zoom, he's covering his ears again. I think the theology is on, some people might think I'm an old cranky guy, which I'll know I am, but I'm probably more liberal than you, but I do think this theology is solidly on not doing that, at least from the Lutheran context, because the Book of Concord, our confessions, discusses the assembly being an important part of that experience, gathered together. So, but again, it's a polity issue. There's a lot of leeway within the Lutheran Church on how to respond to these things. And so you're going to see a lot of different responses. But we at our congregation have chosen to be as safe as possible, and at least trying to protect those that might, if the doors were open, might try to come, but it wouldn't be good for them to come. So we're trying to keep that in mind, how we do everything, and later how we open up again.
We haven't closed anything in the Orthodox Church in America, at least in the Diocese of the South. That's not true for the entire pleroma of the OCA. But for instance, the Metropolitan's diocese, he's in charge of actually 3 dioceses, and he has closed his dioceses. They're not to gather for any reason. The churches are not open. I know that the Holy Synod is going to meet this week, if they haven't done it already, review that status. I don't know how that will turn out for his diocese. My diocese is the largest geographically, other than the Diocese of Alaska. And Archbishop Alexander has not recommended that we close or cease to do services, but he initially cut it down to 10 people, following very similar to the state of Virginia's recommendations or mandates, whatever they've become at this point. He then cut it down to 5. The priest, a few choir members, and perhaps a server. And so what has resulted is that my former choir director, who lives locally but attends a different church at this point, has agreed to be with us for the duration of the pandemic. And she and her older teenage children are very good singers and sing very well together. And she knows, of course, what she's doing. So the worship of the church can continue. So we're very blessed to have her back with us temporarily. She's been a real gift to us. And one of the bishop's mandates is that he not only 5 or fewer people, but that they be the same 5 people. So it's not always 5 of us. Sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 3, but usually we get to about 5. But others in the congregation have asked, can't I just sneak in? Can't I just sneak in? To be honest, the bishop said the doors are to remain locked. Nobody may enter. Prior to that, it was someone was to be the door guard and to recommend that people pray from home. And of course, we're streaming the services on Facebook, because that's about the extent of my newly acquired googly knowledge. I don't have any millennial in me, so I don't know how to go to another platform. Nobody's taught me yet. Perhaps Nick could teach me.
For the folks at home that don't follow our Facebook group, you might want to just briefly share what happened to you on your first outing.
Well, I hadn't ever done a Facebook Live.
Oh, yeah.
Thing. And I hurriedly called my daughter and woke her up, and she's in her own home, and she's 20. And I said, hey, how do you do this? And she said, all right, here's what you do, Daddy. And she groggily talked me through it. And I said, all right, I think I got this. So I turned it on. We began the liturgy. It's a perfectly good liturgy. I preached a relatively decent homily, you know. It wasn't a groaner. Some of them are. And felt pretty good about the experience until I got a shout out from a friend in Pennsylvania who had been watching. And he says, yeah, listen, that was great. I was really glad I could be there. FYI, you might want to check your filters, because every time you got a little bit close to the camera, you got googly eyes. And he sent a snapshot. And I was like, oh, how on earth did that happen? Now, I wasn't upset about it. I was rather taken aback by it, but I thought it was very funny. And of course it was. And it ended up, there was a filter on. I didn't even know what a filter was. Or to look out for them, to beware of them. I have since learned how to turn off the filters. But the story, I reposted his pictures, and took a screenshot of his message to me, and kind of gave a little explanation. And within, I don't know, about 5 days, definitely within 2 weeks, it had gone to every continent, and it had been shared like, I don't know, 2,600 times.
Yeah, it was nuts.
At least that I could tell. I don't know how to track shares. That's another thing that other people need to do for me. But there were comments from all over the world, and I was very amused by it, because it got picked up by at least 3 nationally syndicated online religious channels and magazines or whatever. I don't even know what some of these are, because I don't read. Well, I read, but I don't read those. And,
it was like, for anyone listening, it was like Religion News and Christianity Today and big publications like that.
And there was another Jesuit one that I can't remember the name of.
It wasn't Sojourners, was it?
No, I can't remember.
No.
It was some other Jesuit one, I guess. Yeah.
It was a Jesuit thing, and some fairly well-known journalist picked it up and made a comment about it, and she said, "Oh, well, my favorite story was this." And
it
I
was
still to this day don't know who she is. I've never read anything else that she's written, but
it was
I
it
did
was
read that
super
article.
funny. It was
What's that?
super funny. I was watching it and it was super funny. Your eyes were rolling around, like spinning. It wasn't just googly eyes. It was totally
Yeah, it was great.
like all over the place. And I think what it was just when everything was starting, everyone was making mistakes. And so it was a very providential problem that you had that just brought a lot of joy to people. And the fact that you didn't care was a
I
blessing.
thought it was funny.
Well, it gave people permission, because a lot of pastors are very much perfectionists and hate, they don't want to look silly. You're trying to do something serious.
Have you
But
seen
I
what he
think,
wears? He already looks silly.
well, I think, I can't imagine that Jesus didn't laugh a lot with his followers and whatnot. So I think it's fine. But the some people were really struggling with the new technology more than others, and I had friends after you that had the same kind of thing happen to them. So it was very common, but you were among the first to catch attention, and that was kind of a fun journey to watch you. Not people laughing at you either; they were laughing with you. That was kind of nice.
At least you didn't.
Yeah.
At least you didn't set yourself on fire, because one or two people
Oh,
have done
that
that.
Father
I
Adam,
was a Church of England priest.
if it makes you feel better, I was laughing at you, not with you.
I would expect no less.
So let's kind of transition here. So we've talked a little bit about what your individual parishes and dioceses are doing in response as far as like public gatherings. So let's talk a little bit about the public response. Maybe we can focus on maybe two aspects. Tell me if this sounds good. What your churches are presently doing as far as like interacting with the public and helping to alleviate some of this tension, fear throughout this time, and what you hope to see in the future moving forward. We can go in the same order we did.
My church, Fort Church of St. Martin's Parish, is small and rural. So we're not. There's not a whole lot that we're doing during this time. I mean, I live stream morning prayer from my living room on Sunday mornings, but I will say that my parishioners know how to care for one another, and they're really good at that, and they've been doing that during this time. So without my prompting, as soon as the stay-at-home order came and that kind of stuff, as soon as all of this started to set in, I had parishioners contacting me saying we need to organize, ways for the most vulnerable in our community to get the groceries they need, the medications they need, so on and so forth. And they did it. I mean, this is just one of the wonderful things I think about when you see your parish, your community really live into their own discipleship. They took charge. They set it up. I just kind of facilitated the communication, and that's been the case all along the way. So I provide the worship, through live streaming, but in terms of caring for one another and setting up kind of social calls. So I've got one parishioner who wants to host a Zoom coffee hour, because we have pretty famous coffee hours at Fort Church that last half the afternoon, and when there's not a pandemic, and so a parishioner wanted to set that up on Zoom, and so we're going to be doing that. And basically all I've been doing is just kind of been a channel of information to the rest of the parish, as they've continued to care for one another. It's been really amazing, and it's one of the things, it makes me proud as a pastor to see my parish live into their discipleship. And it's one of those times when one of the buzzwords in the church world is, at least among the more liturgical churches with hierarchies, is we've got to empower the laity. Empower the laity. The laity need to be empowered. Well, I just sit back and see that they don't need to be empowered. They certainly don't need me to empower them. They already have the discipleship and the empowerment of the Holy Spirit to do the things that they need to do to care for one another. And I just try and facilitate that, and then otherwise get out of the way.
Our church is bigger than yours, 600 folks. I think that's a lot bigger than yours. Probably, my history is in a smaller church with about 200. So we have 2 pastors and a very active social service outreach, integrated with other nonprofits in our community, but also independently. For example, our food pantry gave out approximately 75,000 plus pounds of food last year. So we also, and I think I've alluded to this on another podcast, a podcast at some time, we've also sponsored and facilitated weekly meals for the folks, our neighbors that are experiencing homelessness or food insecurity. We participate with 9 other churches in a very special ministry called Micah. It's an independent nonprofit, but all of the 9 churches are intimately involved with it to help take care of our neighbors that are homeless. And there was a lot of meetings at first, a lot of, oh my goodness, like Zoom was all day, different times with the synod and local authorities, and trying to see what the governor's office and health departments and other folks were trying to give as guidance. So fortunately, with 2 pastors and also some very able leadership, we were able to divide and conquer a lot. The Pastor Ann, who's she's the main pastor at the church, and I'm the associate pastor right now. She was handling some of the business ends and the worship planning and everything to kind of guide us and move us forward. And I was focused on a lot of the communication, a lot of things that weren't, I've been helping with the pastoral care issues and social outreach, but that continued, but in a different format, of course, using digital means. And we've had to work with nonprofits. For example, we no longer are giving out food from our church, but we are facilitating support of both Micah and the local food bank to do some of that same. But it's a more consolidated effort now versus a regional separated effort. And it's been a lot of changes. The Zoom meetings are very tiring after a while. I think y'all probably find that would be the same. There's lots of emails and a lot of calls as well. So I find I'm actually, in some ways, perhaps even busier than I used to be. Not that I didn't have long hours, especially when I was a solo pastor. Boy, I think that was still busier. So, because you're doing everything. But compared to the standard of level of work, I think we're spread a little bit thinner because we're learning a lot. I know some evangelical churches they call them different names, but it could be like a digital minister or something like that, digital pastor, basically communications person. And I've had to kind of really take a lot of that up. I had some experience, but not as much as needed. So there's a lot of learning that goes into it. And we're lucky again that we have some folks that have some skill sets where we can divide and conquer and have people attend to things that fit into their skill set. Like Nick's church, we have what we call care groups to help keep in touch with the different members of our church. And of course, the pastors continue to do so, but we're having laity step up to try to help with that mutual caring that's needed during these times. And we are working closely with, for example, we've had a few different emergencies where people were in the hospital, and I was able to work with the chaplain staff there, which I'm very grateful for, that we have colleagues like that where I could call and make referrals since the hospital was closed, and they could go and pray with, check in on our people. And so I help a lot with the police and also the hospital. And so that has kept me busy as well, but that is remotely at this time. So it's very different, but it's very busy. It's not. I heard assistant bishop. He said when he first heard a lot of things were closing down, he brought home a lot of books and whatever, thinking he might have time to read, and he's not having time to read anything. And I'm finding that exactly true for me. There's so many other things to do, but it's an interesting thing. I think most people are in reasonable spirits right now. We've had a few COVID cases in the congregation, but I think overall we're very fortunate. We're doing okay in our region. The hospitals are not overtaxed. I know in Richmond, I heard from my sources there that there were some hospitals for a while that were at risk of running out of equipment. So there's been a lot of stress on hospital and other emergency workers that we're trying to pay attention to as well, even though there may not be from our congregation. How can we support the community is one of the things we're looking at. So the helpers can be helped and move forward.
Well, I have I dare say, a smaller congregation even than Father Nick, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what your big number there is, Father Nick.
Sunday attendance is around 50, 55.
So we're roughly the same for Sunday attendance. I mean, we'll get sometimes between 30 and 50, but usually it's middling around 40.
Yeah.
And
summertime is around 30s to 40s, right? When people take a vacation from church.
right.
Uh,
I don't think that changes from denomination to denomination.
We usually have in the high 100s to the low 200s on a Sunday. And so, and I'm sure this will come up as we talk, but we've also had to make a lot of adjustments in the way our worship's done, of course, and there's a lot of grieving with that. And so that's something like down the road, we might want to talk about people's response to the changes in the way we are sharing worship together. Anyway, back to you, Father Adam.
Well, we, like I said, we hadn't stopped with our services, and so there's, especially during Lent, when there are generally more services during the week, and especially with Holy Week, we were streaming constantly, although not as often as we would be gathered. We were blessed to do a trimmed down version of Holy Week, and we'll be later on blessed to kind of do a Pascha and Holy Week redo of some sort at a time when Archbishop Alexander designates. So a Pascha do-over, if you will. I don't know how that will look, but anyway, that was talked about and promised, so we'll have to see what that looks like. We, having had a very tight-knit, small group fairly consistently over the life of the parish, people are very good at looking after each other. They're very good at, especially looking after me. I have to tell you, it would be a nice thing to say that I've been a pastoral hero and have done great things for my people. But if I'm being honest with you, they've done better things for me over the course of this pandemic. They've been very supportive of me and my family. They've been very supportive of my efforts to love them and to reach out to them. They've been very good, much better than normal. That's a tisk tisk. Much better than normal about letting me know when they have needs or when another among them has needs. They're definitely interested in knowing, where community support is needed. We've been able to help in different ways, small ways, but small groups can help in large ways that are small to some, but large to them. In particular, interestingly enough, and this is not directly related to my parish, but I think actually it is. Our beloved Father John's parish was made homeless by the pandemic, and St. Tikhon's Western Rite parish within the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. And so he's been doing liturgies out of his office at home in Caroline County. And he and his wife were driving a few weeks ago, and had just sent an email. She had just sent an email saying to the parish, we all got to pray for a way to find a new place to worship. And 20 minutes later, they get into Caroline County, and there's a sign outside of an old church building that says "Church for Rent," and it's right on Route 1. It's right on the east side of Route 1, headed north. And they called the number. The guy had already gotten to Ashland. He busted a U-turn, came back to Caroline, and said that he let them in. And I mean, the building is perfect for their needs, and they won't be. I mean, they'd be welcomed back at their temporary rental place, but given that there's a possibility that this pandemic could have a reflare, could have a restart as the fall approaches, or at least that's what happened in 1918. There's no reason to think that it'll happen this time, but it's certainly possible. And we might have another curve to flatten, perhaps. They wouldn't want to be dispossessed again. So it was the right time for them to find a new place. This is a parish with whom my parish is very close. We have a very tight relationship with St. Tikhon's. So my parish is chomping at the bit to get in there to help them make the building ready in an appropriate worship space for St. Tikhon's. And my parish has covered the first month's rent for their new location. That's not a horn tooting. It's I said to them, the role of the mature and established parish is when we get to this point in our existence, we plant other churches. Now, this is not within our jurisdiction. This is the Russian church, of which administratively I'm not a part, but it doesn't matter. This is the local Orthodox church. And there was a universal, unanimous desire to let's do this. Let's cover. It's a small way for us to help plant a church. It's the first month's rent. It's not an especially large amount either, but it was perhaps even more symbolic of a gesture. Like we're going to establish you in your new spot, and we have among our congregation, as do they, a number of craftsmen and tradesmen who can lend their expertise to getting the place established, building the proper altar space and everything, because this is just an empty shell inside. As far as do with it what you will. It's an empty canvas. Make it Orthodox. So there's a lot of work ahead, and it will be carried out probably 6 feet apart and in fewer numbers with masks on. But that's one of the main ways that my parish has reached out locally to. A result of the pandemic was them being homeless. And because he was serving the Mass in his home, his bishop did not want him to be having people come. His home was to remain his castle, so to speak. And he was not prevented from bringing communion to people with some regularity from the reserved sacrament, and has done that. We have been discouraged from doing that in my diocese, unless there's an emergency and people are still able to commune, what have you. We've even been told not to baptize in chrismate during this time, unless, again, it's an emergency. And I mean, if somebody's in an emergency, a medical true emergency, we couldn't go to the hospital anyway. We wouldn't be considered essential, even in a death situation. So there's been a lot of pushing against. I didn't mean to just segue into maybe the next subject, but there's been a lot of pushback, and it's been an emotional kind of pushback. People are not accustomed to not being able to go to church, even the ones that sometimes skip. When you can't have it, all of a sudden what you had at your disposal and maybe took for granted. I'm not saying that they did, but there are those. Churches still change from body to body, but small, lowercase b, small c. They don't change from group to group. People have the same similar behavioral patterns, and I think that there's a lot of understanding, a lot of, well, now that the governor has spoken, we've got to kind of comply. I mean, I don't think I had heard people blaming the bishops, calling them, saying that they'd sold out. I heard that stop when the Patriarch of Russia finally told people to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
And he would serve the services in an empty cathedral. And there's a beautiful video that I saw. He was serving one of the liturgies of the presanctified gifts during Lent, with only his attendants and a priest or two and an acolyte and maybe a few choir members. And you could see him visibly weeping during the service. That's possibly the most beautiful, the most beautiful liturgy that the Orthodox Church offers during the course of the year. And you could see that, this is a man. This is new for him too. And I read a quote from him. I'll probably butcher the quote, but it said something like, "Never in my life did I ever think that I would tell the people to stay home." And it's a heartbreaking thing for me. So when the Patriarch of Russia, His Eminence Patriarch Kirill, called it, I think the Orthodox world was a lot less squawky about it, those naysayers.
Yeah.
I just, because remember, we had some interplay on our Facebook group over that time because there were some people writing about how the Orthodox are tougher. Remember that?
Yes.
And mocking others for not. And so, like, we really feel that the church isn't closed, the building's closed. We're still, like I said, I'm still working hard. We got a lot of folks volunteering, creating masks and serving in different places, but safely following mandates of the government. And we have changed, we don't do house visitation in general. We haven't had to for any emergencies, thank goodness. Thanks be to God. But at the same time, there's always a concern about when you go to homes, you could bring in something to someone's home. So we have to really weigh these things out. Sometimes when you explain it to people, they understand, at least intellectually, even if emotionally it's difficult. But there are some folks, I think, in many different denominations, including my own, that can be somewhat short-sighted or unfair about it. Maybe in their own woundedness, they're hurting others. But I've heard of pastor, I won't say where, that although that pastor been calling a lot of people and trying to use the lay ministry as it existed to contact people, there were people that were upset that pastor in the first few weeks didn't contact everyone, and the congregation is larger than mine. But there's one pastor.
Yeah.
They're still human. They're still going through things with their families and their own. We had like in my house, we had to do a lot of different things with my medical concerns, how to get food here, how to make sure we're ready to stay at home for a while. Concern for our moms that are in other states and how to make sure they're cared for. And most people I've found do understand that and have great compassion for that. But you will run into people that, whether they're just wounded in the past or wounded in the present, they're not necessarily being gracious. Pastors are people too. And there's, as with the recent suicide up in New York with a doctor, there's going to be some pastors are going to have a really rough go if they don't have the right kind of support, or they're perfectionist. And maybe, as even I've alluded to Luther's last podcast on the end of the world, I alluded to Luther's letter on should a Christian flee the plague. And one of his comments is, if, not everyone has the same strength of faith, but you can't leave the weak ones behind. Jesus doesn't want any Christian to be lost. And so we have to recognize there's going to be some faith and fear issues at play, even among some pastors, and we need to try to support and encourage one another and recognize truly what our gifts are and how we can share them in a safe and meaningful way. But I wouldn't ding anyone for doing something one way or another, and unless it's obviously unsafe. That would be my concern.
It's interesting because obviously it's been great to be able to have this conversation. I'm not trying to wrap everything up. I'm just interjecting. that is relatively free of the political nature. Not, I won't say nature, the political side of this that tends to overtake the narrative, because it's interesting to hear like how each of your congregations, and I want to believe this is true for most churches out there, are doing this practically, despite what the loudest voices might say. Practically, the church is out there meeting needs. It's out there being Christ to people. And so it kind of reminds me, there's always going to be two different political sides a person can take, um, to any social issue or whatever. I'm reminded of a brief course I watched, of Tom Wright on Philemon, and he mentioned, in Philemon you get, okay, do I send the slave back and thereby support slavery, or do I set him free and thereby start almost like a class revolution within Christianity? And the brilliance of Paul is to say, no, it's neither one of those. Both sides have to meet at the cross and submit to that, and only from that point can we work out any sort of resolution to everything. And so, is that might be my next question. What do you think that practically looks like, meeting at the cross, getting these two sides to meet at the cross nowadays? I don't want to get like support one political position over another, but like, what do you think? What does that look like? Because I think that's an important question for the church to answer.
Well, if I can go first, because I had some interesting interaction over that with some folks. I think, first of all, there is concern about this situation. This podcast topic that we're using is one that was recommended, suggested by a member of our Facebook group. So it is on a lot of people's minds, particularly on social media. You can become overwhelmed with negativity and negative news and half truths and whatever. Hard to know what to believe. In Virginia, I recommend, I think it's the Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association, VHHA.org or com, I'm not sure. They have a very nice way of sharing information on their database about beds available, respirators being used, and it gives you a good feel for how things are going in the hospital, because that's really the big concern, not trying to overwhelm the hospitals right now. The deaths are tragic and terrible, but COVID's going to do what COVID's going to do at some level. But if we don't have the equipment and everything, then we're not going to be able to help anybody like we could if we did at least have a chance. And so there is a lot of frustration in members of, I think, many communities, sometimes within the same faith community, political in nature at some level, but that there's an argument about how utilitarian we should be, how much sacrifice for, sacrificing one person to save others, how much should that be going on? And that's a very black and white, rigid way of kind of dealing with things, and ethics is much more messy than that usually. And I think when we have folks that are, one, either saying that everyone that wants the economy open is evil, or two is saying that everyone that is wanting the things to stay shut down is afraid and the weak should just die for the sake of the good. I think there's sin going on there, whether it's intentional or not, or groupthink or whatever. I had a friend that indicated that he thought, when I was talking about, Jesus really does call us to have his teachings inform our lives. And just as we are to invite, in a interaction he shared about we should invite the beggars, the poor, and all these vulnerable people to the feast. I think we need to consider them in our discernment, our public discernment. That doesn't mean that it automatically means there's not going to be sacrifice or that we can meet all their needs. It's not utopian in nature. But I think it's what you were suggesting, that we have to kind of meet at the cross somehow. There's going to be enough suffering to go around. And we have to, and I think it could be regionally a different answer, even by each city or whatever, it could be a different answer.
Sure.
But I do think that in our current political environment, we tend not to have friends outside of our political leanings, and we hear a lot of the same things over and over again, and we need to kind of get out of that for the good of the church. And just I think that's a Christian thing to do. But I had a friend that was arguing that Jesus's ethical discussion, like on the Sermon on the Mount, doesn't necessarily reflect into the political world. And I beg to differ at some level. I'm not looking for theocracy or anything, but I do think individually, if enough of us focus on love of our neighbor, which might involve listening to them in a way that we try to think the best of what they're saying and not just condemn it out of hand. Luther talked a lot about that as part of, I believe it was as part of his discussion of, libeling your neighbor, testifying wrongly about your neighbor, is sometimes as you hear things and repackage it in the most negative way possible so you can win your argument.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what God's asking us to do, and it prohibits our ability to move forward. So I'm trying to, as a pastor, and I'll end this up so other guys can talk. I'm trying to repackage and talk about it in my preaching and teaching, and well as how I demonstrated on social media, that we do need to listen to one another. There's going to have to be some give and take. Utilitarian answers don't always stand up to Christ's mandate to love others, sometimes to the point of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So although we don't want to all be afraid and make fear the reason fear of want, fear of food, fear of the jobs, fear of the economy be the primary answer to everything. I understand we also need to give on the other side, that we recognize we can't save everybody, and we can't have too idealistic ideas either. There's going to be give and take in this. There's going to be a hard go in the month ahead.
There's definitely no clear answer. Nick, what are your thoughts on there?
Actually, let me turn it over to Father Adam for a second, because I got the sense that he had something to say, and I'll probably end up taking things in a slightly different direction.
That's the first time you've ever given up your spot to Father Adam. Goodness gracious.
It's a ploy. He's yielding so that he can take the ending.
I don't think he's ever given up his spot to anybody, has he?
Well, far be it from me to disagree with Father Lou.
Like I said in episode 1, that's the nature of the podcast.
I think most people find that Father Lou and I agree more often than people probably would believe. But with regard to the social media thing, I realize that it's becoming more and more of I hesitate to use the word legitimate, because maybe it's the old Luddite in me, but I consider it little more than a plaything, even though I'm fully aware that it is most people's only source of news. Let's be honest. It is most people's only source of news. That's not being a pessimist. That's what I've observed. So I should be more responsible about it, because I'm a little bit of a troll, as you all know. And I like to post funny things, but sometimes the funny things I post are political, and they're from both sides. I think they're very amusing. But I've had pause over the last however long time we've been doing this pandemic thing, or responding to this pandemic, I guess you could say, this quarantine. Sometimes I consider, should I post this or repost this? Because I know the funny intention for reposting something, but someone's going to see this and either become angry or become ill-informed and take what I post seriously. In a position of leadership, I have a presence on social media. I don't post anything like that on my parish's page. But there are things that I've reposted out of amusement, or simply to, all right, post it and see what they fight about, because sometimes I'm very incredulous about something that I read. So I'll repost it and wait for the naysayers, the piranhas to come and eat it up or what have you. And then sometimes I'm disappointed when somebody will share something I've posted as if it's Bible, so to speak, or gospel. And I was like, hey, I didn't post it because I agreed with it. I posted it for discussion purposes. Well, that went south. And so there are things that I'll post with the attitude that it's just social media. But with the understanding also that that's becoming more and more and more the only forum that people have for social discourse. It's a poor forum too, by the way. It's a pitiful one. A very poor replacement for dialogue of any kind. It becomes the echo chamber, and I think it leads oftentimes to, when not used responsibly, I think it leads to a disconnect. And I think it maybe sometimes contributes to people's disintegration from each other. So I think it's a blessing and a curse. Certainly good for disseminating real and true and useful information. But interestingly, kind of joining this kind of thread to the one we talked about before, like the response of the churches and the communities to the pandemic situation. As you know, I hired a plane to bless Hanover County and Ashland City. I took holy water in the relics of St. Andrew and icon of the Mother of God.
To this, Father Adam, I was getting very lost in that labyrinth, but you've come around to something that I wanted to hear about. Tell us about blessing Ashland from the air.
Was that in the church's budget? Like,
It ended up costing about $135. I was expecting to pay about $250, which, by the way, was a reasonable price.
Father Adam, I prayed for Ashland from here and it cost me $0. How about that?
Well, it was also fun to go up in a little wee airplane, so that was cool.
And I'm just joking too. I
know.
did, and I applaud you for giving the college try and everything. It's great.
I did that during Holy Week on Holy Wednesday. In the middle of the day, I took my youngest son, Seamus, with me, and we took St. Andrew's relics, the holy water, and an icon of the Mother of God, and we flew over Hanover County and over Ashland, and I sprinkled the holy water. And so this links back into the social media thing and my labyrinth. The response from the community was very interesting. I would say overwhelmingly positive, but there was a very, very strong negative streak in the community page on Facebook, the Ashland, Virginia residents Facebook page, which is kind of a cesspool anyway, but it's also very entertaining to read on any given day. So, I approve of its existence for my own amusement. But there were some people that were very adamantly opposed to the idea, offended that I would deign to sprinkle my COVID water on top of them. And so there was a lot of vitriol mixed with a little very strong but thin thread of vitriol woven through an overwhelming gratitude from the community for that. And it wasn't a self-aggrandizing thing. It was, I didn't even invent the idea. I'd seen it done. It's been done a lot of times recently, especially I've seen it done in Russia. I saw somebody do it in Texas. And I was like, that's a great idea. That's something we can do.
Catholic and Orthodox, a lot have been doing it.
Yeah, I hadn't seen any reports of the Catholics doing it, but no doubt. Mostly because I just don't read Catholic news sources. I was joking about, well, sometimes I do. But anyway, there was, it might sound to those people who aren't accustomed to that sort of practice, blessing anything, any object with the use of holy water or holy oil, or special formulaic prayers for the blessing of a threshing floor, the Book of Needs or the Book of Common Prayer, which are very similar in a lot of ways, at least in their wording and sometimes even in the way they're set up. There's prayers for the blessing of just about any darn thing.
Lutherans too.
And Lutherans, and you all have something very similar to the Book of Common Prayer. And I've looked through all of them, and they follow the same thread. They've all met. And so it wasn't just like, look at me, I'm going to rent a plane. It was, this is an important act to do, to bless something. What do you do when you're sick. Well, we have the practice of drinking holy water if you're sick. That's not the only thing you do, but it's good medicine. We will anoint. We will give holy unction. We will sanctify places, things, and objects for the purpose of glorifying God and focusing people's hearts and attention and understanding around the idea that the church is active in doing and praying and undertaking efforts to humble ourselves, basically, before God, and to focus on things that are needful, and in particular, not being fearful, but being prudent and hopeful. And that is an act of hope, to go and to bless something, to get in an airplane and go and bless the place where we live. This is our community. If it gives courage or hope or any kind of inspiration of any kind to somebody, especially encouragement during this time, or even causes discussions that are useful instead of, vitriol and silly, full of people's bias, then I think it's a good thing. I think that the blessing has already borne fruit.
I still hate you, Father Adam, so you're okay.
What's that?
I still hate you, so you're fine.
I mean, I was glad to have my house blessed, but I'll say this for the naysayers in that Facebook group. Father Adam worded it this way. He said, "I'm going to make holy water and tinkle it all over you."
Sprinkle. I didn't say tinkle, did I? Oh, he's kidding.
Oh my gosh.
I can tell you that would have been physically impossible in the size of the airplane that I was flying in.
Did any of you guys see the video that went around of, I actually think it was a Catholic priest, doing the same thing. He's like, he's got some relic, I'm not sure.
Oh, he had a monstrance with the consecrated host in it.
Whatever it was, they put the Star Wars pew pew lasers out of it like he was shooting the city down. It was hilarious.
I didn't see that.
That was funny. Okay, Nick, I know you've got some thoughts on this stuff, and then we should probably wrap it up here.
Sure. Well, I guess I want to pick up on it. We've kind of been all over the place with this. Maybe one little thread that I'll pick up though, and it goes nicely with you mentioning the Catholic priest with his monstrance holding the Blessed Sacrament, is that one of the questions, and Pastor Lou alluded to this earlier at the very beginning, one of the questions that has come up as we've been doing live streamed or recorded worship is this question of the Eucharist. And I'd say that it's hard to know. I mean, is Facebook really an indication of, or is social media really an indication of the kinds of conversations that are actually happening in our church, or are they just representative of certain vocal, minorities or whatever? Without getting into that, the bishops across the board in the Episcopal Church have affirmed the same thing that Pastor Lou said, which is that Holy Eucharist is something, Holy Communion is something that can only be done in the physically gathered community. It's not something that can be done in a televised or live streamed kind of way. Although I do know of some, for example, lay Episcopalians who like to get out bread and wine, and that, so that's a great, I guess, Sunday snack for them. But that's all that it is.
You didn't say they were consecrated, Father Adam.
Right. And I think it kind of misses the point to make that a thing. What's been in the Episcopal Church, what's ended up becoming, I think, a bigger debate is whether or not a priest by himself or herself should do the liturgy of Holy Eucharist if they are alone, or if it's just, for example, if it's just me and my wife in my living room, should I be live streaming a Holy Eucharist? And part of the reason why that's become a big question is that during the time of the English Reformation, when Anglicanism was born, we very much took Luther and a Reformation perspective on that. That Eucharist is not something that a priest should be doing by themselves. That it should be an act of the whole congregation. And in fact, you'll still find in the Book of Common Prayer the exhortation. And the whole point of the exhortation is to let people know that on an upcoming Sunday, there will be Holy Communion, and they need to prepare themselves for that. And they are, the whole parish is invited and welcome to receive if they have properly prepared to receive Holy Communion. Now, we do Holy Communion in the Episcopal Church. Most churches do it every single Sunday, so the exhortation isn't read very often anymore. But it's still there in the prayer book. But there is a stream of tradition in Anglicanism and in the Episcopal Church known as Anglo-Catholicism, and I have certain sympathies with that tradition, obviously coming out of a Roman Catholic background, that says, well, okay, that was good for the time of the English Reformation, but now we've gone back to some of our Catholic roots, and so it's actually good for the church for a priest, even if he or she is by themselves, to say Holy Eucharist and to live stream that for the good of the church. So what's interesting is, and I'll try not to be much longer about this because I know it's inside baseball. It's very specific to the Episcopal Church, but what it's done is it's brought back to the surface divisions and debates within the Episcopal Church and within the Anglican Communion that really I think most people had thought were done and over with for the past 30 or more years, which are debates between high church and Anglo-Catholic positions, low church and more evangelical positions. So for example, I am and this is my bishop's guidance, and I'm in agreement with it. I have been live streaming morning prayer from my living room, not Holy Eucharist, because I can't invite my congregation to join me. And so I feel like as a priest, if I can't open this up, if I can't open Holy Eucharist up to my parish, then I have no right to be doing it. But the Anglo-Catholic position, probably Father Adam's position, is that it's a good and right thing to do, even if no one can come to it but the priest and perhaps the priest's spouse. But I tend, in this one case, to, even though I have a very high view of the Eucharist and a very high view of ecclesiology, I tend towards this, what might be seen as a more low church position. So I've been leading morning prayer. So this division between high church, low church, or Anglo-Catholic and more evangelical. And then there's even a third group, and this is where I'll end it. There's even a third group who points out that, so much of the current Book of Common Prayer in the Episcopal Church, this is the Book of Common Prayer 1979, was influenced by a movement known as the Liturgical Renewal Movement. And that movement had a huge impact on the Episcopal Church, on the Lutheran, ELCA Lutheran Church, even on the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church has Mass in the vernacular now, that is, not Mass in Latin, because of the Liturgical Renewal Movement. And that movement, which takes a more, what sometimes people call broad church view, says, well, you shouldn't, an Episcopal priest shouldn't be doing morning prayer, live streaming that from their living room on Sunday mornings, and they shouldn't be doing Eucharist. They should be doing what's sometimes known as anti-communion, not anti-communion, but anti as in before. Anti-communion, or sometimes also known as the liturgy of the word. In other words, the first half of our Eucharist, our Sunday morning Eucharist service, or liturgy is what we should be doing in live streaming. And so this actually came up, I think, either on my Facebook page or in our group. I can't remember. As an issue that came up. So that we now have these three different strongly held positions: the broad church liturgical renewal movement position, the high church Anglo-Catholic position, the low church or evangelical position, about how we should be live streaming. And it has very much to do with this Eucharist question. What's interesting to me is we had thought all these debates were done. We thought that this was over with. And this situation has brought it back up, that it's really just been dormant, but it's still there in the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion.
It's going on in the Lutheran Church, though, too, Nick. I was on a Facebook page for Virginia Synod pastors, and there was discussion similar to what you're describing, not necessarily due to Roman Catholic connection, but the idea of celebrating Eucharist through the internet, some folks embraced as new form of church, and that we shouldn't be restrained by the confessions that we have because it's a new day, and this is why the church is dying, and all that kind of argument, which I don't buy personally. And some were offended by some writings that were posted that argued that we really shouldn't be doing it. And I don't think we need to be offended by it. I think it's a legitimate discussion. I'm open to being wrong, but explain to me why. I'm not convinced yet. And that's the way I take it. And in our Lutheran tradition, we do also have, as a very deep tradition, liturgy of the word, that anti-communion kind of discussion you had. So again, Lutheran and Episcopal are not that far off because of the way the Reformation happened. And we could have some folks that had a very small group like Father Adam does, celebrating the Eucharist and broadcasting it. But we would traditionally not invite people to get a piece of bread and some wine or grape juice and act as if they're celebrating at home. We would not traditionally do that.
Yeah.
But that's a big debate right now. And that's another discussion. Maybe when we do talk about the Eucharist, we can get into more of the details about that.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the subject of our next podcast, right?
Where is it going to be? That is it going to be exorcism? Is it going to be any kinds of things? We don't know.
Hey, before I forget, can we make a shout out to Emily McFarland Miller, who helped Father Googly Eyes Rector get famous? I think she called him the Googly Eyes Rector is what he was called. So, but it's Emily McFarland Miller. She's Emily Writes on Instagram and also Twitter, and we've had some good interaction with her.
Is she the journalist?
She's what?
Is she the journalist?
She's the journalist from the Religious News Service, and does some really good things. Maybe something Father Adam doesn't read, but most of the world does. And I appreciate the fact she noticed Father Adam and brought some joy into the world.
Yeah.
Through his gaffe.
Also, let's recognize that traditionally, folks have understood the eyes to be the window of the soul. So we were getting a real vision of Father Adam's soul when we saw his googly eye.
Well, that's like when he's saying that I'm going to disagree with him so much, or he was going to disagree with me, and all he really admitted to is that he likes to stir the pot on Facebook.
Right. Well, that was the labyrinth I kept getting lost in.
I don't think I needed that confession because he does that in real life. What are you talking about?
It's true.
If you haven't,
I can't deny it.
If they ever make a icon of Father Adam, it's going to be a big pot with a stir. He's going to look like a witch.
If anyone's listening and you haven't gone back and listened to the live event where Father Adam lays forth why he hates ecumenism, we invite you to go back and listen to that. As we're recording this, it just dropped yesterday, and it's a good time.
I like to call it Father Adam hates everybody.
All right, well, let's wrap it up there, guys, because we've been going for a little over an hour, and if we still have people listening at that point, I mean, they deserve a couple years off in purgatory.
We have none in Ashland listening.
None in Ashland listening, yeah.
Father Adam's help.
So, would I think I prayed us out last time. Father Adam prayed us out for the live event. Would either Nick or Lou like to pray us out this time?
I guess I can.
Okay. There's a couple prayers that were written by a professor of mine, particularly for this time, and I thought maybe I would.
Go ahead.
do those, but
That's fine with me.
this is the systematic theology professor at Virginia Theological Seminary, who has had a huge impact on my way of thinking and on my faith, and she's currently putting out her systematics theology. So the first volume came out a couple years ago, The Doctrine of God. The next volume, which I believe is on the Trinity, is coming out this November. Anyway, she's written a couple prayers for this time. So one of them is a prayer in time of pandemic, and the other one is a prayer in time of isolation. I'll go ahead and read both of those if that's all right. And her name is the Reverend Dr. Kate Sondrager. I know this is going to come as a shock to Father Adam, but apparently women can be theologians and they can pray. So they're not just good for making babies, Father Adam.
Oh.
Oh my.
Oof.
You're making me flustered here.
All right.
Well, I can tell you that I'm not any good for it.
So let us pray.
All right.
This hour we turn to you, O Lord, in full knowledge of our frailty, our vulnerability, and our great need as your mortal creatures. We cry to you as one human family unsure of the path ahead, unequal to the unseen forces around us, frightened by the sickness and death that seem all too real to us now. Stir up your strength and visit us, O Lord. Be our shield and rock and hiding place. Guide our leaders, our scientists, our nurses and doctors. Give them wisdom and fill their hearts with courage and determination. Make even this hour, O Lord, a season of blessing for us, that in fear we find you mighty to save, and in illness or death we find the cross to be none other than the way of life. All this we ask in the name of the one who bore all our infirmities, even Jesus Christ, our risen and victorious Lord. Amen. And now a prayer in time of isolation, also by the Reverend Dr. Kate Sondrager. Almighty God, our times are in your hand. We call upon you in this hour of our need, when we are lonely and must stand apart. Be our strength, O sovereign Lord, our calm in the midst of raging seas, our refuge and our dwelling place. Sanctify to us this time, drawn away from others, even as your Son, O Father, drew away to a lonely place for prayer. Deepen our need of you, O Lord, that every breath may be a whisper of the Spirit's prompting, a renewed searching of the deep things of God. Stir up in us the great act of intercession, that we may spend our time apart in prayer for the world you created and sustain. Bless us in our turning toward you, and make us a blessing to those who stand in need of you, the whole fragile earth. All this we ask in the name of the great physician, even Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. We'll cut it there.